Hello, thank you very much for joining. It's Barry Coombs from Computer World. You're joining us for a Define Tomorrow webinar with Dr. David Spence from Veeam. David is a systems engineer. We're going to be talking about Veeam Availability Suite V9. Obviously, whenever Veeam do an update, there tends to be a raft of new features and functionality. So I look forward to learning a little bit more today. David, over to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you, Barry, for inviting me. So welcome to this webinar on the new features of the Veeam Availability Suite and version 9. Like Barry said, I'm David Spence from Veeam Software, and we'll be talking through some of the exciting new features in version 9 in product enhancements which can enable you, the customer, to get more out of your data and improve availability. So let's have a quick look now at some of the features we'll be talking about today. One of them, the first we'll talk about, is the integration with EMC. So already, in fact, since version 7, we've had the ability to perform backup from storage snapshots. This is the way we get our the storage subsystem to perform the snapshot, and we can back up directly from the snapshot and there reduce the load on the source hypervisor. Well, with version 8 we brought in support for NetApp. Originally it was HP. Version 8 brought in support for NetApp, and with version 9 we'll be talking about the enhanced support for EMC. Another quite major new feature actually in version 9 is the enhancement to Veeam Cloud Connect. We originally brought out Veeam Cloud Connect in version 8, but in version 9, as we'll see very shortly, there's been some exciting new enhancements. The big enhancement is Cloud Connect replication. And we'll also have a look at further storage integration, and we'll talk about that later. But again, a big feature, a big part of that is the direct NFS access, which greatly enhances our ability to back up, especially if you've got a data store with VMware and you're exporting it and using NFS. It enhances the ability to get that data backed up quickly. We've got some very good, very exciting new enhancements to the Veeam Explorers, in particular the Veeam Explorer for Oracle, but we'll also have a look at some other enhancements for some of our existing Explorers. There are some interesting enterprise enhancements. As Veeam is moving more and more now into the enterprise, there's some nice new features which we've brought out to help with the distributed environment. So customers or companies which have offices and branches all over the world, to help you back up that data at remote locations. Also backup storage integration. So we already support a number of deduplication appliances, and we've brought in some good features which will help with that. In particular, some enhancements to the HP Store Once device, which is basically Catalyst support. We've also brought out the scale-out backup repository, and again we'll talk about that one later. But it's a nice new feature which effectively enables you to add extents to your backup repository. And then finally, BitLocker, and we'll save that one till the end. So let's first of all start with the Veeam integration with EMC storage snapshots. So let's have a look at this. So the reason we do this, it's important to understand why we have backup from storage snapshots. Like I said, we originally with 7 and 8 we could back up HP and then NetApp directly from storage snapshots. But you've got to understand the way Veeam works when it's backing up virtual machines is it performs a VMware snapshot, and then it backs up the VMware snapshot. Well, for those of you who've been working with VMware for a while, you'll understand that actually whilst that snapshot is open during the backup process, well, that puts a load on the source hypervisor. And then there's a further load later when you actually have to delete the snapshot, because actually deleting a snapshot isn't deleting a snapshot, it's actually merging it back into the original VMDK. So therefore there's an I/O impact there. Okay, well, for small VMs with a low change rate, that's not really too much of an issue. But if you've got a very large virtual machine where you've got a very high change rate, that can put quite a significant load on both holding the snapshot and then merging it back into the original virtual disk. Well, with backup from storage snapshots, what you're able to do is after that, or what Veeam does, it integrates with VMware and it integrates with the storage system, so that when the VMware snapshot has been created, it instructs the storage system to create a storage snapshot, at which point that VMware snapshot can be deleted, it's not needed anymore. And so the whole snapshotting process is now done by the underlying storage system, and that removes the load of holding the snapshots from VMware, from your production system, and nicely isolates it with the the storage system, because the storage systems are designed to do that. That's what they're there for, to have snapshots. So with version 9 we've brought out support for EMC, for VNX, and also VNXE as well, and this enables you to perform your backups up to 20 times faster than the competition, but also the flip side of that is it helps you with the recovery of data as well. So this is the idea of Veeam Backup from storage snapshots, so you can back up directly from EMC VNX or VNXE snapshot copy. So when Veeam performs the backup, the EMX, the storage system, performs a snapshot which contains the crucial VMware snapshots, and the backups are performed directly over the SAN from those snapshots. And because we mount it directly in the Veeam proxy, it means we can still use change block tracking, which means that backup is done very quickly. So like I said, up to 20 times faster than competing solutions, because we don't have to remount it back at the VMware host. Also though, the flip side, so we do, I've mentioned why we do that for backups, but also we also need to be able to recover our data. That's the point of backing it up. You back it up, so if there's a problem, you can recover it. Well, the Veeam Explorer for storage snapshots enables us to recover that data quickly. So we can run the Veeam Explorers directly on the storage snapshots and then recover that data. So that's not just for files, but we can recover individual application items. We're going to talk more about the Veeam Explorers later, but basically we can recover individual application items very quickly directly from the storage snapshot. So it's not just about RPO, but it's also about RTO as well. So Veeam Cloud Connect replication. So this is, to me, this is one of the biggest and most significant features in version 9. So if you remember going back with version 8, we could back up to the cloud. So you could set yourself up as a Veeam cloud provider, and then customers, existing Veeam customers, could take their data and back it up to you. So it was a good, easy and secure way of getting that data off site, so in the result of a disaster, your data was safe, it's at a different location. And that's great, and that's very important, because then you don't have to worry about tapes and losing tapes or tape tracking, any of that. The data is in a nice, secure secondary location off site, in compliance with the 3-2-1 rule. And that's why we did that, and that's where we were with version 8. And one of the very nice features of that was that no VPNs were required. It was all done nicely and transparently over SSL. Now, with version 9, we've brought in Cloud Connect replication. So previously, if you like version 8, think of it as backup as a service. Well, with version 9, we've got disaster recovery as a service. So if you think about this from a business perspective, a lot of companies would quite like to have a DR site. Well, yeah, but they can't afford it. DR sites are expensive. You've got to rent floor space, you need to have new server hardware, you need to have new licenses. It's pricey. But on the other hand, it gives you very low RTOs because you've got this live secondary environment. So wouldn't it be nice if somebody could provide that as a service for you, a DR site as a service? Well, with Veeam Cloud Connect replication in version 9, they can. So now your service provider, rather than just holding copies of your backups, the service provider can now host live virtual machines and to all intents and purposes a disaster recovery site for the customer. So virtual machines are now replicated to the service provider, to a hypervisor, either VMware or Hyper-V, it doesn't matter, we support both, at the service provider's site. And so in the event of an issue at the production site, those virtual machines can be failed over. And you can fail over one, or you can fail over the whole site. And there's some very clever networking going on with Cloud Connect for replication, which I'm afraid we don't have time to go into today, which ensures that the customer's network is extended over to the service provider's side. So again, what advantages does this give you? Well, actually, for the customer, so you've got a cloud host giving you disaster recovery. They hold all the necessary computing resources so that your virtual machines can be brought up when needed, and it supports furlough or even partial site failover. So if just an individual virtual machine failed over, it could be failed over to the service provider's side. And so you've still got continued business if there's an issue. And just like with version 8, with backup, it's all done over SSL, so it's secure, and also it's safe at your service provider's site. And again, for the service provider's point of view, it's very quick and easy to set up. Also, it's multi-tenant support is part of it, because obviously if you're a service provider and you are you have multiple customers, it's important for you that your customers' data is nicely segregated, your customers' data is separate, so one customer can't see another's data. All of that is set up, and that you can monitor that all effectively. And there is zero competition from Veeam. Nobody else does this. We don't. And the key with this is that we don't do this ourselves. Only our partners do this. So we're offering this for VMware and Hyper-V, and we only offer this through our partners. There's no competition from ourselves. Yeah, Veeam ourselves don't offer this. It's only our partners who do this. So we're not competing against our own channel here. Is the key with that. Let's have a look now at some primary storage integration. So we've already mentioned the exciting new feature with EMC, so we can do backup from storage snapshots now for VNX and VNXE. Well, also there's some other quite nice new features which have come out in version 9. One of them is direct NFS access. So this has been a feature which has been long anticipated, and this is where, well, actually for VMware, if you think about it, a lot of the data stores are not accessed necessarily over direct attached storage or over a SAN, but often over NFS. NFS works very well, actually, as a protocol for VMware data stores. And wouldn't it be nice if we could actually back up that data directly over NFS, if the Veeam Proxy could actually mount that exported data store and back up the virtual machines directly? Well, yes, it can. And it can do that from version 9. We've introduced our own NFS client, and we can back up those virtual machines directly over NFS. And so that's great for if you've got storage like Tintry, for example, which only supports NFS. There are others. You can now back up that data directly rather than having to go through the hypervisor, or perhaps using Hot-Add. And another great new feature, a brilliant new feature, is NetApp SnapMirror and SnapVault integration. So previously with version 8, you could trigger a SnapVault, you could trigger a SnapMirror with the NetApp integration. But what you couldn't do is then back up from it. You still had to back up from your production storage. But with version 9, that's no longer a problem. You can back up from your secondary storage, thus eliminating any overhead on your production storage. And also the on-demand sandbox for storage snapshots. We've already mentioned the Veeam Explorers for storage snapshots, but one of Veeam's features which really sets us apart from many of the solutions out there is the ability to spin up virtual machines in an isolated virtual lab. So you've got effectively a virtual copy of your production systems all working together in a nice isolated environment, yet an environment which can be accessed. So you can do testing, you can do development, and currently with version 8, or should I say previously with version 8 now, you could do that from backups, or you could do it from replicas. Well, now you can do it directly from the storage snapshots as well. So this is just showing you the NFS. So without direct NFS access, if you had an NFS data store, you could back it up perhaps using Hot-Add, or you could back it up perhaps directly over the network using NBD. Yeah. Well, with version 9, you can back that data up directly, so you're not putting any load on your source hypervisor. You are backing that data up quickly and efficiently using NFS. Basically, we've integrated an NFS client into the Veeam Proxy. And this is NetApp. This is showing you basically how it was with version 8. So previously with version 8, yes, we could trigger those snap mirrors and those snap vaults, but we still had to do the actual backup from the production storage. Well, with version 9, we still can trigger the snap mirror and the snap vault for NetApp, but then we can back up from them as well. So if you think about this, you could almost think about the snap mirror or the snap vault as being your primary copy. So when you configure your backup, you're effectively doing your primary copy to a snap mirror or a snap vault, and then you're doing a secondary copy from that. So what it's giving you is a very fast way of recovering, because you've got your snap mirror and your snap vault, but also, if you think about this, you're not putting any load anymore on your production storage. You're doing your backup for your secondary storage, and you're using now that secondary storage. It's giving you that extra value, so you can use that as your backup source. And again, the on-demand sandbox for storage snapshots. The virtual lab, like I said, incredibly useful for testing and troubleshooting and training, because you can spin up a copy of your production environment in an isolated virtual lab from backups, from replicas, and now from your storage snapshots. Let's have a look now at some of the enhancements for the Veeam Explorers. And the first of those is Oracle. Now, first of all, I just want to explain about the Veeam Explorers. The Veeam Explorers, if you think about what Veeam's about, we're here to give you availability so you can recover your data very, very quickly if there's a problem. And everybody knows how quickly we can recover virtual machines. We can recover any virtual machine within 15 minutes, and often a lot quicker without instant VM recovery. Yeah, that's great, but what if the problem isn't the whole virtual machine? What if the virtual machine, the operating system, is running fine? Your problem is that there's some aspect of the application isn't running fine. Perhaps a database has been corrupted. Perhaps an administrator has accidentally deleted a service account or a GPO or something like that in Active Directory. The machine's fine, the problem is the application. You need an application restore. Well, you don't really want to go through all the trouble of recovering an entire virtual machine. Far better to be able to recover the application. And we already do this with our Veeam Explorers. I'm going to look at those now, and more importantly, we're going to look at some of the improvements. And this one here, the Explorer for Oracle, enables us to perform application level recovery for Oracle. We're already doing this, and have already been doing this since version 8 for SQL. But with version 9 we can also do this with Oracle, because what we're doing, as well as backing up the virtual machine in an application consistent state, we are also backing up the transaction logs, and this enables us to go back in time to a particular transaction and restore the database to the point we want it to be at, quickly and efficiently, without having to go through all of the issues of restoring the entire virtual machine. We support this both for Linux and for Microsoft. So if your virtual machine is running on Linux, which actually, to be honest, quite a lot of Oracle databases are, not a problem. We work just as well with Linux as we do with Microsoft for this. It's our very first Veeam Explorer which works with Linux. And it also, I've been asked this quite a bit, it also supports Oracle's automatic storage management as well. Yeah, so the idea here is you can restore individual databases very quickly, giving you a low RTO. So the Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Exchange. So we've already had this for a while. This is not a new product. We've had the Veeam Explorer, I believe, since version 7 off the top of my head. What version 9 gives you is some enhancements. One of the nice enhancements I like is the export report. What has been exported from Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Exchange? I always think this is useful because this is emails. So if you want to know what naughty little backup operator has been doing, perhaps he's been doing the export of a HR database or a payroll database, so emails, sorry, from a particular user in HR or payroll, well, actually you can find out here. The Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Active Directory, we brought this out in version 8, but there's been some big, I think it was 8, but there's been some big improvements with version 9, and one of the really nice improvements with version 9 is the group policy object. So previously, with version 8, what we could do there with our Explorer for Active Directory is we could do things like we could recover service accounts, for example, user accounts, computer accounts, all those type of things, Active Directory partitions. And that was great and very useful. In fact, there was a customer was telling me how the Veeam Explorer practically saved his job when he was able to recover an entire OU which he's accidentally deleted. Which, as you can imagine, if you're an AD administrator, that's probably not a good position to be in. But he said with the Veeam Explorer for Active Directory, he was able to recover that in about 5 minutes. That's great. And now, with version 9, you can also recover group policy objects. So if you've got a GPO and it accidentally gets deleted, not a problem, you can recover it quickly within a matter of minutes. Also, again, if you're using Active Directory for DNS as well, so if you've got AD integrated DNS zones, well, again, we can recover them for you as well, and we can also recover configuration and partition records as well. All new in version 9. Now, the Veeam Explorer for Microsoft SQL, that was brought out in version 8, and in version 8 we brought out the ability not just to recover Microsoft SQL databases, but also as part of the backup, not just backing up the entire virtual machine in a consistent state, but to also back up the transaction logs. And if you think about this, this enables you to have very granular recovery. So you could say back up your SQL server maybe every few hours, maybe even once a day, but then you're backing up the transaction logs at a much higher frequency. And therefore, because you're backing up the transaction logs, that enables you, when you do the recovery, to specify a particular transaction that you want to restore to. Well, with version 9, we still do that, but we can also not just recover individual databases, we can go right down to the table level now. Also, it's a small feature, but actually the impact is quite significant. With version 8, when you did the SQL restore, you had to use a local SQL instance which is running on the same machine that you were running the Explorer on. Well, if you think about it, where's the Veeam Explorer going to be running? Well, typically it's probably going to be running on the backup server. And what version of SQL are we going to be using for the backup server? Well, for small environments, it's probably going to be SQL Express, which has got a 10 gig limit. And therefore, because we're dumping it effectively to the local instance, we've got a limit of around 10 gig for our restores. But what if our database is bigger than 10 gig and we're using Express? Okay, well, you need to be running on a different machine then. Well, not a problem with version 9. So with version 9, we can specify, look, we're going to do a SQL restore, and we're going to be using that SQL server there. And you can specify the particular SQL server to use. And so, yes, if you are using SQL Express for your Veeam backup server, not a problem. You can specify a full-blown SQL standard without that database limit. And again, SharePoint, because the back end is SQL, has a similar technology. So the back end database, again, is SQL for SharePoint. And again, when we restored SharePoint, we need a staging server for the Veeam Explorer. But with version 9, you can now specify a remote SQL server. So again, if you do have that 10 gig limit, perhaps you are using SQL Express, then again, it's not a problem, because you can specify a SQL server which isn't Express. Basically, you can specify the SQL server you want to use. There are also a number of other enhancements: full site, site collection, list and item level restore as well for the Veeam Explorer for SharePoint. Let's have a look at some enterprise enhancements now. Now, if you've used Veeam previously, say with version 7 or version 8 or any other previous versions, you'll realise that in order to manage it, unless you've got the Enterprise Manager, in order to manage Veeam, you actually have to RDP to the Veeam backup server and then fire up the Veeam backup console, because in version 8 and earlier, the Veeam backup console was just part and parcel of the Veeam backup server. Yeah, well, in version 9, it's a completely separate installation. It's a separate tool and it's a separate install. You can even, if you wish, install the Veeam backup server without the console at all. So for example, on my laptop, which I use for customer demonstrations, I've just installed the Veeam backup console on my laptop, whereas my virtual environment, I just connect to that remotely with the backup console. And the reason this is a good idea is it enhances scalability, so you don't need to be connected to the machine that you're using to manage Veeam. You could install the backup console on your own laptop and manage a remote backup server, so it gives you added convenience. Also, if two people want to perform a restore at the same time on the same backup server, there's no issue with RDP sessions causing one user to lose his connection. And so again, no more kicking off users when logging on. Another it seems like quite a small feature, but it's quite significant, is the guest interaction proxy. So this requires a certain amount of explanation of how Veeam works when it's performing backups. So let me explain. So remember the way Veeam works. Veeam, yes, it's backing up virtual machines, and yes, it's backing them up via VMware snapshots, but internally it's backing those virtual machines up in a consistent state, an application consistent state. And the way it does this, and if you've ever set up Veeam and if you've ever gone through the process of setting up a backup job, what you'll have noticed is that at a certain screen you'll get to the box application aware processing. Now what you're doing here, and what actually happens here at this point, is you'll have to put in some credentials, and this will allow Veeam to actually connect, it's actually the backup server, to connect to the virtual machine that's being backed up, and insert a little bit of runtime code. And what it actually does there, yes, we're agentless, Veeam doesn't use agents, but nonetheless the backup server will talk to the virtual machine which is being backed up, and because it's talking to the virtual machine it's backing up, what it will do is ensure all of those applications are quiesced. So basically it will call VSS and back up those, ensure all of those applications have performed a VSS snapshot, which it will then use as part of the backup process to ensure that that virtual machine is backed up consistently. So all of those applications are in an application consistent state, and therefore we can recover them cleanly. But how do we perform that? How do we actually make the connection to the virtual machine? Well, we've got two ways of doing that. Now the first way is RPC over the network. Yeah, so if you've got a nice network connection, and if your backup server is local to the virtual machine, to the hypervisor, and the virtual machine you're backing up, dead easy. Very straightforward, nice easy network connection, works fine. Yeah, but what if you don't? What if you're trying to back it up remotely? Well, in that case, it'll have VMware tools installed, and therefore you'd use the VIX APIs of VMware tools. Yeah, that's fine, but there is a well-known issue with 2012 and 2012 R2 that if you've got user access control configured or enabled, and the user account you're using for the application aware image processing, if that isn't called administrator, and I don't mean called admin, which has got administrator privileges, if it isn't actually called administrator, in fact isn't the local administrator account, it don't work. Yeah, if you've got user access control configured. That could be a problem. Not usually a problem locally, because you can usually do this over RPC, over the network. And if you really are stuffed, what customers had to do is to use VMware Tools quiescence, because that's another way of quiescing the virtual machine. However, with version 9, we've got a new role, which is the guest interaction proxy. And the guest interaction proxy, and again, this is very useful, incredibly useful, if you are connecting to that virtual machine remotely. The guest interaction proxy is a role local to the virtual machine you're backing up. So, for the sake of argument, let's say your data center is in Bristol and you're backing up a virtual machine in Cardiff. So you maybe have your Veeam backup server in Bristol, and you'd have your the machine you're backing up in Cardiff. That's where you'd install your guest interaction proxy. And the guest interaction proxy, because it's now local to the virtual machine being backed up, it can be placed in the same VLAN and therefore connect over the network, can now make a network connection to the virtual machine and back it up without having to use the VIX APIs, and therefore use an account which isn't called administrator. So it won't run foul of this UAC problem. And if you think about it, well, remotely at Bristol, chances are if I was connecting, if I was trying to do that remotely across the network, probably I'd run into firewall issues and have to use the VIX API. Not a problem anymore with version 9 because of this guest interaction proxy. And the guest interaction proxy is doing all of that task, all of that work that the backup server had to do previously, of connecting to the virtual machine and getting it into a state ready for backup. And also it reduces the load on the central backup server as well, and it enhances scalability. Another role is the mount server, and you could think of the mount server as the flip side of the same coin. So, whereas the guest interaction proxy is there for backups, the mount server is there for restores. So, again, you've got to think about how this worked in version 8. So imagine I'm performing a restore of a virtual machine, and actually I don't want to restore the entire virtual machine. Perhaps I want to restore a particular file or a particular email. How does the Veeam Explorer actually work in this case? Well, actually it works by the Veeam backup server actually mounting the image of the backup directly on itself and enabling you to look at those files. Yeah, that's great if it's local. Won't take any time at all. It'll be nice and quick. And in fact, it is quick when it's local. But if you've got a customer, again, go back to the scenario of a customer perhaps with a site in Bristol where the backup server is, and another site, say in Cardiff or even Glasgow, further away, that they're trying to restore the data from. Well, actually, you've got to mount that data all the way from, say, Glasgow to Bristol. Well, with version 9, we've brought in the mount server. So the mount server will be located at a good location close to the source, where the virtual machine is being backed up, and more importantly, close to the repository where that data is stored. Yeah, and this is what we have here. And so now it is the mount server who will mount the backup file from the remote repository. Whoops. And it will present that in terms of everything the backup server needs, and more importantly, everything the Explorer needs, in order to see all of those individual files, all of those individual items. You could almost think of it as almost like a thin client type interaction. Whereas the VBR server is now just seeing what it needs to see. The Explorer sees only what it needs to see, and only the traffic which is required to be seen is sent over the WAN. So that mounting and all of that data is now kept locally at the site where the virtual machine and more importantly where the repository is. So again, this is enhancing scalability, and if you think about this, both of these features are there for the enterprise. They're there for organizations with remote sites, and it enables you to back up those remote sites much more quickly and also restore the data much more quickly as well. Because if you look at the diagram I've got here, rather than that data having to be mounted at the VBR server and then transferred all the way back again for the restore, the data just stays local. It just stays where the source is and it stays where the repository is. So it gives you a much quicker restore. We've also brought in a number of good new features for tape support as well. So version 9, I'm going to talk about these in some detail now, adds some advanced features for native tape support, including global media pool, parallel processing, grandfather, father, son media pool retention, we'll look at that in a bit, and also support for devices without native Microsoft Windows drivers. So let's have a look at the global media pool. First of all, again, let's just think about where we were in version 8. So in version 8, a media pool was to all intents and purposes owned by the library. So the library had the media pool. So if you had tapes in a media pool, those tapes belonged to a particular library. And there was no option in version 8 for having the media pool span multiple libraries. With version 9, a media pool can span multiple libraries. So for example, you could have 2 or more libraries with a media pool spanning both, enabling you to do failover perhaps. So you'd have the main library where the backups would go, but if that wasn't available, you could fail over to a secondary library without any problems. Parallel processing, I like this feature. Parallel processing, again, it's enhancing our support for tape. We already support tape very well. Remember version 8 brought out the tape server? Well, with version 9 we've brought out parallel processing. So what this means, as it says here, tape jobs using the same media pool can process backup files from separate backup jobs at the same time. That's new with version 9, so in plain English, it enables your backup to tape jobs to be quicker, to run more quickly. Grandfather, father, son media pools. So again, this is something, if you're familiar with Veeam, this is something we've been able to do with our backup copy jobs for some time now. So with our backup copy jobs, if you remember, you can specify, well actually I want this retention in terms of days, or alternatively I can say, well actually I want a grandfather, father, son retention. So I could keep, say, my weekly files for a certain length of time, my monthly files for another length of time, and my yearly files for even longer. So perhaps I want to keep my weekly files for, say, 4 weeks, for a month. I might want to keep my monthly files for 12 months perhaps, and my yearly files for 7 years. So I can then keep my data, then the further back in time that I go, that granularity stretches out. So I've got high granularity for recent backups, but much broader granularity as we go further back in time. We've been able to do that for a while now with backup copies. Well, with version 9 we can also do the same thing for tapes. Okay, for those of you who've used it, you can sort of achieve the same thing, but it's not particularly easy. You've got to have retention for separate media pools with version 8, but with version 9 you can just have a grandfather, father, son retention policy, and it enables you to do that. So it enables you to basically stretch back the retention using fewer tapes, very importantly fewer tapes, and having that granularity. So you've got the high granularity for recent backups and the coarser granularity as you go further back in time, and you can do that for tapes now as well as for disk. Another issue, and for those of you who used to take the VMCE exam and the VMTSP exam, because I think they both quiz you on this, is there was an old question there which used to ask you, well, what is the requirement for support for tape in terms of drivers? And the answer always used to have always you can't back up to a tape library which has a known or generic driver. You always had to have the proper drivers installed. Ideally the manufacturer supplied driver, or at least the integrated Microsoft drivers, so at least so that the tape library was recognized. Well, with version 9, if you don't have the correct drivers, it will just fail over to native SCSI commands. So again, it saves you time, and if you do have a library and you don't have the drivers, it's just a way out and a way of enabling you to still perform your backups to tape. Let's have a look at some backup storage integration now. So again, if you think about your backup environments and the different repositories you'll have out there, you'll have a good, fast, perhaps a JBOD for your primary copies, and then let's say you need to store data for longer periods of time. You may well have a deduplication device, and then perhaps your tape or cloud provider for offsite. Well, actually, deduplication appliances are absolutely brilliant if you want to store more than just a few copies of data. Because of this deduplication, you can store lots of copies of your data, have a very long retention time, yet not actually consume all that much space, because these devices are deduplicating all of that data. So they're a very efficient way of storing a large amount of retention points. Now currently, and actually this hasn't changed in version 9, we support EMC data domain, we support Exagrid, and we support HP Store Once. But for those of you who actually tried to working with HP Store Once in version 8, the support wasn't quite so good. It was alright, it worked, but it wasn't as mind-blowing as you'd expect. Well, we've brought out HP Store Once Catalyst integration with version 9, massively enhancing the performance of HP Store Once, massively, and we're going to look at that in a bit. Also, we've updated EMC Data Domain Boost as well, so that just works a bit better, even better than it did. And there's also some new features for high-performance backups with any deduplication appliance as well, things like per VM backup chains, and we're going to look at that in a minute. So Veeam plus HP Store Once Catalyst. So what's this about? Well, what Catalyst enables you to do is effectively split the load of deduplication between the Veeam backup proxy and the HP Store Once storage system. So remember, the HP Store Once is a deduplication device. You can use that as your Veeam repository. But rather than having to send all of the data, so imagine you have a backup job perhaps with 20 virtual machines in that. Maybe they're all Windows as well. There'll be quite a lot of data there, which is actually duplicates, which the HP Store Once may well turn that, maybe it was 100 gig of data, might well turn that 100 gig into 10 gig, say, for the sake of argument. But you've still got to transfer, previously you still had to transfer that 100 gig across the network. That's no longer the case in version 9. In version 9, because we're using HP's Catalyst feature, the proxy will do quite a lot of that deduplication to begin with. And what that ultimately means is that it's only transferring across the network the data the Store Once actually needs. So you're saving on bandwidth, whilst at the same time those backups will run quicker. Because if you're sending less data across a network, then it will take less time. Let's face it, 10 gig takes less time than 100 gig. So it makes your backups run quicker as well. Yeah. So that's the new feature with version 9, HP Store Once Catalyst. Now again, actually what I've just described here with HP Store Once, we've done for a while with data domain, because we already support and did support in version 8 data domain boost, which is a similar feature. But again, with version 9 we've enhanced that to get an even more enhanced features, and we also include encryption as well over the WAN. Now this is quite a nice feature. It seems quite a small feature, but actually I like this. And you need to, in order to understand this feature, you need to understand where we were with version 8. So with version 8, from a performance point of view, in terms of the backup chain in terms of fulls followed by incrementals, if you're using forward incrementals or forever forward incrementals, you have a full backup followed by a series of incrementals, and one incremental points back to either the previous incremental or perhaps to the previous full. Okay, but actually what's contained within those for a job? Well, in version 8 and earlier, it was the whole job. So your backup chain was for the job. So if I had 20 virtual machines, that backup chain was for those 20 virtual machines in the full job. And in terms of performance, in terms of writing performance, there was just the one stream that you were using for your backup job. Well, with version 9, that chain, rather than necessarily, because this is an option, rather than necessarily being for the whole job, is on a per VM basis. So you can specify, actually, I want this backup to be run on a per VM basis, and therefore I can have more streams, and therefore I can push much more data at my backup repository. And that's very, very useful for your deduplication devices, because they want data at a fast rate. So this will make your dedupe boxes run much more quickly, especially especially the generic boxes, the boxes that aren't EMC data domain, HP, store once, or Exagrid. Yeah, your backups will run much more quickly for those. So if you're connecting to them over an SMB share, then your backups will run much more quickly using the per VM backup chains. This is one of the biggest features, in my opinion, with version 9, and it takes the backup repositories to the next step. And this enables you really, before I describe how it works and what it does from a customer point of view, this helps you from a cost point of view. You can reduce your storage hardware spending, so you can use existing storage systems. So if you have spare storage systems, you can take a LUN and just add it to a backup repository on the fly. You don't have to create a new repository, you can just add it. And it also enables you to simplify your backup and storage job management, because rather than having, and often we see this in customer sites, especially big customers, that have lots of different backup repositories which actually weren't being utilised particularly well. There'd be a lot of spare space. But this enables you to use that space much more effectively. And also, by doing that, it increases availability as well. Because if one of those LUNs perhaps is offline, Veeam will automatically use another one. So let me just explain how this works and what it is, the scale-out backup repository. Perhaps the best way of explaining this is it's a repository of repositories. So when you first configure this, what you actually do is you'll go in there and you'll create your backup repositories. And then what you'll do is you'll create a scale-out backup repository which just points to those. So your backup repositories, some might be a direct attached storage, some might be NAS, some might be a deduplication box. Really doesn't matter. You've got those repositories, then you create on top of that the scale-out backup repository, which is just pointing to them. So the scale-out backup repository, which is now pointing to those individual repositories, will just send data to those repositories, depending on how you've configured it. So you could say, actually, I'm going to keep it so that for one particular backup job, or the full and the incrementals, they're all going to go to that same sub-repository, if you like. So let's say the DAS, we tend to call them extents, so you could call them extents, doesn't really matter. But if the full originally went to a particular sub-repository, then all the rest of the backups will go there. Alternatively, you can say, well, actually, I'm going to do it by performance. So I know this box here is a dedupe box, so I know that's pretty good for my fulls. But this other one here, this other LUN I've got, it's on direct attached storage. So I've got this direct attached storage box. So this repository is good for incrementals, because maybe it's quite good RAID level, or perhaps it's SSDs. So actually, I can do it by performance. So I can say this LUN's got high performance, so it can just take incrementals and then save the load for the big fulls to my dedupe box, which has got less performance. So you can split the fulls and incrementals. Or you can say, well, actually, this particular extent, well, that's mixed, so I can have both. So you can do it that way as well. So it gives you flexibility. And you can also say, well, actually, what if I'm running out of space now? So again, hopefully you have Veeam 1, so you can look at your backup infrastructure and you can see where you are in terms of your repository space, see when you're going to run out of space, and you can just add an extent on the fly. So that's why we call it scale out backup repository, because you can add that extra sub-repository, if you like, as and when you need it. So it gives you much greater flexibility, but also, very importantly, it enables you to maximize the resources that you have, that storage resource. And that's why it's quite a key feature. Like I said, it's a big one. I remember I was there at the SE training, which we had in Rome last year, and there was a big round of applause when this was announced, because it is quite major, actually. It's quite a big feature, and the best way of thinking about it is a repository of repositories. Yeah. So again, as far as the backups job is concerned, you just point it to the big scale-out backup repository, and Veeam does the job of working out who to send it to. And for our final feature, BitLocker. Now, if you think about this, when you're backing up a virtual machine, there's a lot of data on that virtual machine which you actually don't need. Yeah? You don't need deleted blocks. You don't need swap files, do you really, when you're backing the virtual machine up? So if you're doing a straightforward virtual machine backup, there's actually quite a bit of wasted space there, which wouldn't it be nice that I could just filter it out? In the same way, if I was using a legacy backup solution, when you're backing up files, often you'll filter out things like MP3s and things like that. I don't want to back up this directory because it's got the backup of everybody's iPhones. Everybody tends to back up their iPhone to this directory, or that's where they store their music files or whatever. Yeah, well actually that's very, very easy to do with a legacy solution because you're backing up files. A bit trickier to do with an agentless solution which is backing up whole virtual machines. Well, in version 9 we can do that now. So what we can actually do is we can delete particular parts of that virtual machine and say, well actually I don't want to back up particular files, I don't want to back up particular folders. And so BitLocker will analyse the NTFS MFT and it will identify deleted data. And it will skip blocks which have deleted guest files, and basically it will not back up data on that virtual machine which doesn't actually contain any data, and specific folders which you specify I don't want to be backed up. All still agentless and still performing an image level backup of the virtual machine. But the strength of this, and the reason this is a good idea, is that yes, you're reducing now the amount of data that you're backing up, so you're saving space on your repository, which is good. But also, I always think about this, if I'm saving space that I'm backing up, well actually I'm transferring less data, so my backups will run more quickly. So A, it's saving space, but B, it's enabling my backups to run more quickly. So thank you very much. I do hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for joining. Have you any questions? Are there any questions?
I don't think we've had any questions as yet, but we'll give people the last few seconds. I think from my side that there's a lot of new functionality there in the latest version of Veeam. As always, we've got increased performance, increased scale with the functionality you're talking about there. We're also able to be a bit more intelligent and exclude items that maybe was a bit more tricky in the past. So as ever, it was a particularly big update for Veeam. Veeam seems to be sort of bang on every year, coming out with an update that's giving the users more functionality, probably for that's already included in your existing licenses. So what I would urge customers to go away and do is kind of not just go away and simply upgrade, but look at the functionality you need, look at your service catalogue, look at your RPOs and RTOs, and see what the new functionality inside Veeam can actually help you deliver. Maybe previously you haven't been able to do something like DR, as you say, because I haven't got a secondary site, it isn't affordable. Maybe there's new ways you can look to achieve that, and a new functionality. So
definitely.
So thank you ever so much, David, for today. I hope everyone that's watched the live stream and watches the video afterwards finds this useful. If you'd like any more information, head over to definetomorrow.co.uk. You'll find a list of our top 5 features over there for Veeam, and we'll have lots more webinars in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks.